be learning we'll be reading Megilat Ruth. And the story of Ruth takes place at this period of time in the Ksir Chitim and Ksir Seorim. This is the time when it happens. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to try to dive into the book, which is very short. It's only 4 chapters, okay? And offhand, it's also quite understandable as books in the Tanakh go, as opposed to some of the other Megillot that we have, like Eicha or Kohelet and Shir Shirim, which need to be explained and understood and taken apart, and the parable and its metaphors. Megilat Ruth seems to be pretty straightforward. Haemet, does everybody know the story of Megilat Ruth?
Yes.
Gedalia knows the story.
More or less, yes.
You know the story? Kind of. Meir, you know the story of Megilat Ruth? You know the story of Megilat Ruth? So I'm going to quickly, mamash, like an overview of the story, and then I'm going to ask the question that comes up. The story is about a man named Elimelech. Okay, we're going to see it inside, obviously. A man named Elimelech, who is from Beit Lechem. There is a famine. He decides to leave Israel and go to Moab together with his children and wife. They arrive in Moab. He dies. Elimelech dies. His children remain there, get married with 2 Moabite women, and then they die too. So Elimelech and his 2 sons die in Moab. So who's remaining? The wife, Naomi, and the 2 wives-in-laws, daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. Ruth, after her sons die, she hears that everything's okay in Yehuda, back in Eretz Yisrael, so she wants to go back. She starts going back. Her daughters-in-law want to come with her. She says, "Why in the world are you coming with me? You're going back to nothing. I can't give you anything. I'm not going to have any more children. You're going to live a life of sorrow. You're Moabites. It's not worth it." And one of them is convinced and leaves. And Ruth says, "No, I want to come with you anyway." And she comes with her. And they reach Beit Lechem, and they're completely destitute. They're very, very poor. They have no money. And Ruth has to go out and gather what's called the gifts of the poor, matnot aniyim, right? She goes to the field to reap the whatever is left over, the leket, the shichecha, the different parts of the presents that are given to the poor people in the fields. As she is working in the fields, it turns out she works in one of the fields of a relative of theirs, a relative whose name is Boaz. He's a relative of Elimelech, apparently his brother, and that turns out really good, because maybe he'll be the one who redeems Naomi and Ruth. Redeems them. It's not quite as clear in the psukim as it seems to be, but it means that he will redeem their fields and also redeem Ruth, in other words, marry Ruth. So that becomes an issue. But at first, neither it doesn't seem like Ruth is so aware of this, even though Naomi already is scheming, and she already has ideas of how this is going to work. So after Boaz meets Ruth in the field, and he's very nice to her, just does a lot of chesed, he says, "You could be here and don't go anywhere else, and you could reap in my fields and drink the water from that we have here. Don't worry, I'll take care of you," in other words. And she's very happy. She comes back and tells her mother-in-law that she met this guy named Boaz, who's really nice, and she goes, "Yes, great. Now look what you have to do." And at some point, at the end of the harvesting of the wheat, there's a special night where the people sleep in the goren, in the place where they gather the wheat. And then Naomi, according to Naomi's plan, Ruth goes and she sleeps in the goren, and she wakes up, and Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night, and there is Ruth in the goren with him. And he goes, "Who are you? What's going on here?" And she says, "It's time for you to take me as a wife," pretty much, and in that way to reinstitute the family of Elimelech that disappeared, in essence, because there is no one left. So Boaz says, "It's a great thing you've done, but I can't do it necessarily. There's someone who's closer to me. Wait till tomorrow." The next day, they have this whole halachic discussion: who's going to take over Elimelech's fields. And as Boaz points out to the Sanhedrin there, and to the Dayanim, to the Shoftim, to the judges, that whoever takes the fields of Elimelech has to also take Ruth. for a wife. And this other relative who's closer than Boaz was says, whoa, I can't do that. That's already too much. So he steps back. Instead of him, Boaz takes over, takes the fields, takes Ruth for a wife. And from there is born the children who lead to David in 3 generations. Okay? That's the story of Megilat Ruth in a nutshell. Heather, you got it?
Yeah.
That's the story of Megilat Ruth. Wonderful. Beautiful story. Very, very, if any book in the whole Tanakh that is very calm, very pastoral, very personal, it's Megilat Ruth. Okay? It's so personal and so pastoral that people ask, not me, the Midrash asks, why in the world is there Megilat Ruth? What in the world is this book doing in the Tanakh? Okay? That's the question they ask. And different people ask it at different levels in different places. They ask, why is this? Now, it's a nice story. It's a beautiful story. It's nice, but since when do we tell personal stories in the Tanakh that don't have ramifications for Am Yisrael? In other words, we have some stories of personal people like Yonah, right? There's the Yonah book of Yonah. He's a prophet. He's going to do things for the grand scale kind of story. What in the world is David? This story, the end of David's mentioned once in this whole story, right? It's the last word in the Megillah, right? The last word in the Megillah is, right? I'll read this, right? So, Ele Todot Peretz holidet Chetzron holidet Ram holidet Aminadav holidet Nachshon ben Aminadav, right? The guy jumps into the Red Sea. Nachshon holidet Salmon holidet Boaz. There's our Boaz, okay? In other words, he is the grandson of Nachshon ben Aminadav, okay, the president, the Nasi, the Bnei Yehuda, who we read about in the Torah. Okay, he's the Nasi of Yehuda, so Boaz is his grandson. Boaz holidet Oved, that's his child with Ruth. Okay, they have a child named Oved. Oved holidet Yishai. Yishai holidet David. End of book. That's it. So that's the end of it. That's when David is mentioned. So that's the end of the story, that he had David. Okay? So you could say, so David is mentioned here, but I meant this is the story of how David is born, I guess. It's his family story. But Beseder, since when do we do this stuff?
Well, it's a proof
family
for
stories. It's a proof of?
David, because there was people tried to disprove his claim to
Know
the
that.
throne because of Ruth.
So Gedaliah already has a great statement here that says this is a document of yichus. What's yichus? How do you say yichus? Heritage, right? Heritage or relation. Ancestry. David, as we know, he comes from Ruth. And Ruth is a Moabite. And Moabites are not our favorite people. Okay? They're not our favorite people. There are issues with Moabites we're going to talk about. And Be'emet, one could say, this was written. Be'emet, there's a Perush who says it. I just heard that Rav Shlomo El-Kavetz, the man who wrote the Chadodi, he has a book where he talks about Megilat Ruth. And when he asked the question, why do you need Megilat Ruth? He says exactly what Gedaliah said. This is needed for Yichus for David. And Shmuel wrote it. When did he write this book? He wrote the book then, when there was a discussion. In other words, when was the discussion there? According to Chazal, when David is fighting Goliath, after David comes back from fighting Goliath, there is a really weird pasuk where Shaul turns to Avner, his Sar Tzava, and he asks him, he says, who's this guy? And we knew the chapter before, David's already been playing for him, they know each other, they're buddies. And suddenly he says, who is this guy? And Avner says, I don't know who he is. And they go and they find out, and he's Ben Yishai, and we're like, what? What's going on? You know exactly who David is. And so Chazal, relating to these very weird psukim, say the question wasn't who is he? The question is he worthy of becoming part of Am Yisrael? Is he worthy of being marrying into the king family? Maybe possibly being a king. He just killed Goliath. But also the question is he Bichlau worthy possibly of being part of Am Yisrael? Right? That's the discussion. Says Doeg Edomi asks him, Doeg, right, the big bad guy in the story of in Shmuel Aleph. Doeg says to Shaul, until you ask if he could be part of the king, if he's from Zerach or from Peret, from which child of Yehuda is he, you should ask if he could become Bichal, part of the Kahal. Who says he could be part of Am Yisrael Bichlal? He's a Moavian. And then Avner gets up and says, no, it's okay. And he says, no, who says it's okay? Then Amasa gets to, there's a whole huge discussion. As David's on his way back with the head, with Goliath's head and sword, there's a whole discussion whether he's Bichlal going to be Beseder. And according to Rav Shlomo Alkavetz, he says that then Shmuel said, all right, I have to write down, I have to make this clear, that this guy who I just anointed, who I anointed beforehand, and is going to be king, they don't even want him to be part of Am Yisrael. All right, I'm going to write the Sefer Yichus. That's what the Megilat Ruth is. Megilat Ruth is David walked around with his back, like you guys have when you have to go to the Misrad Pnim, right? Bring another document, and another document, and another document, and bring this, and bring this. So David needed a document. This was his document. Shmuel wrote him his document to go to Misrad Pnim. Oh, sorry, sir, you can't be a king of Israel. You're from Moabite. No, here we go. Here's my thing. Here's I have, and it's okay. And Shmuel's chatum that it's Moavi v'lo Moavit. Right, a male Moabite is a problem. A female is less. We'll talk about this as we go on. That's one take on why we have Megilat Ruth. So, in other words, unique of all the books in the Tanakh, there is one book that is for Malchut Beit David. It is to give the stamp of approval that David can be king. Mashiach could be king. Right? David doesn't end with David. We just learned in my share, right? When he says David Melech Yisrael Chad Sod, the Malbim writes that the Sod of David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. In other words, there's a Sod. The King David is not only King David. King David is everything we believe in Mashiach and the Geulah. He represents all the great dreams of our future. And if everything would fall already in the very beginning, that would be problematic. So Megilat Ruth sort of strengthens that. Of course, we who read this chapter, we know that the story with Yehuda and the Mashiach has all kinds of problems in it, all kinds of curveballs to that story, right? One story being a curveball in the story of Yehuda or Beit David is Yehuda and Tamar, right? Yehuda and Tamar, that it's not the best. And on the other side, there's Lot and his daughters. That's where Moab is from. Moab is from Lot, who has incest with his daughter, which is pretty bad, if Bigadol. Right? They have two kids, Moab and Ammon. Ben Ami is what she calls her the other son. Kitzor, so that's another issue, obviously, that's going to be in the backdrop of Megilat Ruth, is this issue of the Yichus, the issue of who can be king and what and how, and we're going to have to ask the question why that's so important. Another thing the Midrash asks, it says, why is this Megillah written? It doesn't have any halachot, lo mutar, lo asur, lo muzit. What's the deal with this Megillah? This is the Megillah is all chasadim to teach that Hashem loves chesed, or people who do chesed. That Hashem loves people who do chesed. Is that there? And that's what the whole Megillah is about, chesed. The Ruth does chesed with Nomi, and Boaz does chesed with Ruth, and then they do chesed with... lots of chesed going on. There's a lot of chesed. There's a lot of chesed going on in the Megillah. That's what it's for. Okay? And another opinion of what exactly is going on here in the Megillah is the Torah, when we read it on Shavuos, right? So the Torah, in essence, is chesed. Okay? The Torah is chesed. This Megillah is a lot about chesed, so we want to read about chesed on the Yom Matan Torah. That's why they understand why it's connected to Shavuos, right? Why we read Megillat Ruth on Shavuot is there is something inherent in the Torah. It's a statement about the Torah. The Megillat Ruth is, in a nutshell, the epitome of the Torah. The Torah is a Torat Chesed, like we say Torat Chesed al Shona, right? There's something that the Torah is supposed to be pushing us towards Chesed, and this is what Megillat Ruth. So all these different opinions that has to do with Chesed, has to do with Torah, has to do with Yichus of Malchut Beit David, are ideas that exist before we even come to learn the Megillah itself. And we're going to keep that in mind as we head into learning the Megillah. Okay? Again, still the question is, it seems a very, very weird story. It's out of context. Every other story in the Megillah, in the Tanakh, has a national context. Right? The book is not a personal book, even though it tells stories of personal people. The real story is the story of Am Yisrael, okay? To how we became Am Yisrael, and then Am Yisrael. All the books. Like, think about the books, right? What books do we have? They're all stories. They're prophecies about Am Yisrael, or they're the stories of Am Yisrael. It's very, very rare you have a story of someone. It's really a story of someone. Nomi, Ruth, Boaz. That's it. So there, Megilat Esther has ramifications for all of Am Yisrael. There's like zero on everyone. But this book is very, very, very specific. So we're going to have to try to be going from the specific to the general back and forth with the assumption that this book is not a different book than all the rest of the Tanakh. It's like the rest of the Tanakh, but written differently. And it's presenting to us differently. I said there, all these are Mavo, it's Akdama, it's an intro to the book. You could probably stay on it a little longer. But we're going to dive in. What we're going to do is we're going to be learning it, Bezrat Hashem, Megilat Ruth, with a lot of Malbim, as we want to do often in the Shiurim. Okay? And the other thing, what I'd like to do in this specific learning, what we're going to try to do is read the book with a lot of thoughts of what other stories are referenced here in the book. Okay, and that will be something where I'm going to need your sensitivity to the words. Okay, in other words, I want you guys to we're going to be learning this a little bit together also. Okay, what words does this remind you of? What stories do you guys feel are echoed in this book? Okay, so I already mentioned a couple stories, but we're going to see through the words themselves of the chapters that there are echoes of other stories going on here, or through the words, through the storyline itself. So let's start off with Perek Aleph here. We'll read it together, the whole chapter. And then we'll go. They're really divided into 4 parts. The book is each chapter is pretty unique. It works pretty well, even though we're not right. The Christians are the one who divided up the chapters. They did an okay job, and this time around. ויהי בימי שפוט השופטים, ויהי רעב בארץ, וילך איש מבית לחם יהודה, לגור בשדה מואב, הוא ואשתו ושני בניו. ושם האיש אלימלך, ושם אשתו נעמי, ושם שני בניו מחלון וכיליון אפרתים מבית לחם יהודה, ויבואו שדה מואב ויהיו שם. Let's just quickly get a picture. It was in the time of the Shvot HaShoftim, the time of the judges, which already we're interesting where we are and why it's here in the Ketuvim and not in Nevi'im, and together with Shoftim. Vayhi Ra'av Ba'aretz, there was a Ra'av in the land. Vayelech ish mibet lechem Yehuda, lagur b'sdei Moav hu v'ishto shnei banav. And a man from the fields of from Beit Lechem went to live in Sdei Moav, in the fields of Moav, he and his wife and 2 children. Okay, we don't get a name, we get the story, and then we get the names. V'shem ha'ish Elimelech, v'shem ishto Naomi, v'shem shnei banav machlon v'chilyon, Efratim mibet lechem Yehuda, ve'avo Sdei Moav ve'yu sham. Okay, so the name of the man is Elimelech, the name of his wife is Naomi, and the 2 names, the sons' names were Machlon v'chilyon. They're Efratim mi Bet Lechem Yehuda. It's a funny word. Efratim sounds like Efrat, or
Efrat.
It sounds like Efrat, right? Anyone ever been to Efrat? That's the city of Efrat. Efratim mi Bet Lechem Yehuda. Be'emet Bet Lechem and Efrat are Samud Echad. Who do we know who is connected to Efrat and Bet Lechem in the Tanakh that we know? There's Rachel. Rachel is born B'derech Efrata. She's born B'derech Efrata. He Bet Lechem. So somewhere around this area, as Zechariah throughout there, interesting, Ephratim also sometimes refers to someone from Ephraim. All right, so the word Ephratim we'll need to take a look at. B'Beit Lechem Yehuda, v'yavo Sde Moav, v'yu sham. So they come to Sde Moav and they yu sham. Of course, what's our question here going to be? The first question. Why is he leaving? And why did they go to Moav?
Were they buried?
And what?
Were they buried? Does it make a difference if they're outside?
Where are they buried?
Yeah, because they went to Moab.
They were buried in Moab, probably.
Yeah. So they left Eretz Yisrael to be buried outside.
Well, they didn't leave to be buried. They died. They thought they would be saved because of the Rav, right? Apparently, they thought it would be better in Moab, and yes, apparently they're buried outside. Which is
more of an issue.
What?
There's a problem for that.
It's a problem for sure. It's a problem not to be buried in the house of your fathers. Not to be together, right? As we know that people are very, very important for them to be buried with their forefathers, for sure. There are a lot of issues going on here. We're going to have to take a look what exactly is going on with Elimelech. So, Elimelech ish Naomi, v'tisher hi u'shnei banea. So Elimelech dies, who's called Ishi Naomi, right? The man of Naomi, and she stays with her two sons. V'yisu lem nashim moaviot, shem ha'achat Orpa, v'shem ha'shenit Ruth. All right, so they marry Moabite women. One's name is Orpa, one's name is Ruth, and they sit there for 10 years, for around 10 years.
Do you know this is where Oprah got her name from? They just misspelled it on her birth certificate.
Are you serious?
There's a random fact.
Okay, interesting. Okay, it's not like the greatest of names, but beseder.
No, exactly.
Vayamutu gam shnehem machlon v'chilyon. So they also die. The two sons die. So it's a real shanda. It's a real tragedy going on here. It's horrible what's happening here. Yeah, it's a tragedy. They go to Moab to live, and they die. And who dies? The men die. The women don't die, or Naomi doesn't die. So the woman is left for her two children and her husband. Mi'isha. You see the hey with the mepik with a dot in the middle. It means from her ish. Mi'ish shela mi'isha. Vatakom hi v'chalotea. Okay, so that's the intro to the story almost. Vatakom hi v'chalotea. Vatashov misde Moav. Ki sham'a bisde Moav. So she gets up, she and her two daughters-in-law, Kalotea, the Kala is the daughter-in-law, Vatashov misde Moav, and she returns from the fields of Moab, because she heard in the fields of Moab that Hashem pakad et amo. Hashem remembered his people. Hashem is coming to redeem his people. Who used that term, pakad? Yosef, nachon, pakod yifkod, Elohim etzeh. Right, that was the hint, that was the thing. So when Chazal say, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes, however many hundreds of years later, he comes to Am Yisrael and he says, right, pakadeti, and he says, yifkod, right, Hashem come to save you. And he uses the shorish pakad, they go, ding, ta-da, we got that one. That's the hint from Yosef, who used that word. So here we hear pakad, we're also ding, there's something interesting going on here. But anyway, she hears that Hashem has remembered his people to give them lachem, to give them bread. So it's time to go back. Vatetze min hamakom asher hayta shama. She leaves the place she was in. V'shtei chalotea ima. V'telachna b'derech lashuv el Eretz Yehuda. It's very dramatic, right? They get up and they leave and they walk and they go. There's a lot of verbs here for this movement from Moab to Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yehuda. Vatomer Naomi l'shtei chalotea, lechna, shovna, isha levet ima, yas Adonai imachem chesed kasher asitem im amitim v'im adi. So Naomi says to her two daughters-in-law, go, return, each girl to her the house of her mother. Hashem will do a great chesed like you did with the dead and with me. What exactly is the chesed they did? We'll have to see. Yiten Adonai lachem, umatzena menucha isha bet isha. May Hashem give you the zchut, and you will find rest with a new husband. Vatishaklem, vatisena kolan, vativkena. She kisses them, and they all cry. Very, very dramatic, emotional moment, right? The mother-in-law, who has nothing left of her family, tells the two daughters-in-laws who like her and want to stay with her, says, go home, go home. And then they say to her, "V'tomarna la, ki itach nashuv le'amech." No, we want to go back with you to your nation. Beautiful statement. ותאמר נעמי, שוב נא בנותיי, למה תלכנה עמי? העוד לי בנים במאי, והיו לכם לנשים. She says, go back, my daughters. Why are you following me? What, do I have any more children in my intestines? Or I guess I here would be my womb in this case. And you'll have children. Or you think I'm going to have another sons, that you would marry my other sons, right? Because we know that often happens in a family where the sons die. Then the daughters-in-law marry another brother. Said, I'm done. Shovna bnotai, lechna. Go, return my daughters, go. Because kizakanti miyot leish. I'm too old to get remarried. Ki amalti yesh li tikva. What I'm gonna have hope for more children. Gam haiti alayla leish, gam yaladati banim. Even if I would have relations with someone and tonight have children, halahem tisabelna. Ad asher yigdalu. What, you're going to wait for them? You're going to pine for them until they get older. Halahem te'agena. What does te'agena mean? Right from aguna. Right, you'll remain barren. You'll remain like an aguna, chained, separate. Levilti ayot leish. You won't be able to have relations with someone and have children, have a family. Al bnotai. Please don't, my daughters. Ki mar li me'od mikem. It's very hard for me to see you. The hand of God was on me. You don't need this sorrow. So they continue crying. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaves to her. Now it's funny, it doesn't say Vatishak Orpah lechamota and left. It just says she kissed her. But we understand from the continuation of the story that kissing was a farewell kiss. And then she leaves. But Ruth stays with her. Vatomer, so now Ruth's there. Orpah left. Naomi turns to Ruth and goes, Nu. Bechavod. Vatomer, Hinei shava yevimtech el amav el Elohea. Shuvi achrei yevimtech. Your Yevima went back to her nation and her gods. You also return after Yevimtech. It's an interesting terminology of the other wife, the sister-in-law, call her Yevimtech. Vatomer Ruth, al tifgi'i bi, le'ozvech lashuv me'acharayich. What's tifgi'i bi? What does lifgoa mean?
To hurt.
Lifgoa usually means to hurt in modern day Hebrew. But we know the word paga has other terminology. If anyone remember, we learned in Gemara here, in Brachot, right, that the word lifgoa also is a word of prayer. So there, Hashem says to Yirmiyahu Navi, don't pray for them, don't ask me about for them, ve'al tifgabi. That's what Hashem says to Yirmiyahu. Now, he wasn't thinking Yirmiyahu was going to hurt him. That would be hard to do. But he does mean, stop beseeching me. Okay? And that's what Ruth says. Al tifge'i bi le'ozvech lashuv me'achorayich. Don't beseech me to leave you and to leave and return from after you. Ki el asher telchi elech. Very famous psukim that Ruth says here in the for betach, for anyone in the giur process. These are sort of like the mahut of the giur. Ki el asher telchi elech. Wherever you go, I will follow. Ubasher talini alin. Wherever you sleep, I'll sleep. Amech ami. Your nation is my nation. Elohayich Elohai. Your God is my God. Basher tamut yamut. Wherever you die, I will die. V'sham ekaver. There I will be buried. Ko yaseh Adonai li v'cho yosif. Which is a swear. I swear, Betzem. Ki amavet yafrid ben yuvenech. The only thing that will separate between us is death. V'terek imitametzati. So Naomi sees she's really, really trying. Hi lalechet ita, v'techda ledaber ela. And she stops talking to her. Okay? V'telachna shtehem ad boana bet lachem. So they walk, the two of them, until they reach Bet Lechem. V'ike boana bet lechem, v'tehom kol ha'ir alehem, v'tomarna hazot Naomi. So there's a great midrash here that says that they wanted to sneak into Beit Lechem. Naomi was not interested in coming in, completely barren, completely with nothing left. Her and this Goyisha girl together come into the remnants of whatever left. So they try to hide, but their luck runs out right there. Not that she had much luck before. They come into Beit Lechem just as Boaz's wife died. And there's a funeral going on, and the whole city is at the funeral. And they were going to try to come in through the graveyard so no one would see them. But everyone's there. And they like, bum. They walk in, and everyone turns to see them as they come in. It's a very dramatic thing that has meaning we'll talk about, Bezrat Hashem. And they come in, and the whole city, Vatehom kol ha'ir alehem. Tehom means like a big mehuma, a big to do. Okay, when they come in. Vatomar na'azot Naomi. Is this Naomi? Right, you can imagine the view. This is Naomi, the rich aristocrat who left 10 years ago, comes back tatters and a beggar with nothing, no money, no anything. ותאמר עליהם אל תקראנה לי נעמי, קראנה לי מרה, כי המר שדי לי מאוד. Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter. Mara, call me the bitter one, because Hashem has made me bitter, very bitter, or Hashem has made my life bitter. אני מלאה הלכתי, I went out full, וריקה משיבני Adonai, and they coming back empty. למה תקראנה לי נעמי? Why would you call me Naomi? V'Adonai anavi v'shadai hirabi. Hashem tortured me, and Hashem has caused evil for me. ותשוב נעמי ורות המואביה כלתה עמה שבה משדה מואב, והם באו בית לחם בתחילת ציר שעורים. So they sit, they sit somewhere, right? It says vatashov, or they return, and they came to Beit Lechem in the time of the beginning of Ksir HaSeorim, of the reaping of the barley, meaning now. Not Shavuot, no. Now, the barley, that's the Omer. Now, exactly now. This is happening right now. That's the story. They're
waiting for Shavuot.
Right, so they're waiting for Shavuot. But this is the Tchilat Ksir Sorim is exactly now. The Ksir Sorim is Pesach time. So they come in. That is the end of the beginning of chapter 1. And it's a great story. I mean, it's interesting and it's fun. And and it also has another element that we didn't talk about in the beginning, and that is Megilat Ruth is a really, really important Megillah for Gerim. Okay, for anyone in the Gerut process, Megilat Ruth has has something that, in essence, we sort of are missing throughout the whole Tanakh. In other words, Shlomo HaMelech marries Bat Paro, Lemashal. He marries a lot of other women also, but he marries Bat Paro. What happened? How does it work? What does that mean? Could you just marry? What happened? Was there a giur there?
No, probably not the way that we have it now.
That sounds like a giur.
Maybe it's just easy because this is just limits.
Moshe Rabbeinu marries Tzipora.
Yeah.
Now, that was before Matan Torah, obviously.
Having children is your giur.
But I'm just saying, the Tanakh does not really talk about giur so much. Okay? We hear, right? If you guys remember, whoever learned with me different books of Shmuel, suddenly you have like these names, like someone like Itaya Giti, right? Is he from Gat? Is he Jewish? This guy, Itaya Giti? Uriah Chiti. Uriah, right? Bathsheba's husband. What does that mean that he's Uriah Chiti? What does that mean? Was he a Hittite from the Chittim? Was he from the Eretz Chittim, but he's Jewish? Did he do Giur? The Tanakh does not seem to really deal with this very much. But here in this case, we have Ruth really spelling out some important things. Okay? Right? There are all kinds of statements that are very much, after being pushed away by Naomi, she takes upon herself to be part of it. Now, is this a religious statement? Is it just a nice statement? Is it a pathos statement of saying, I'm going to be with you in the thick and the thin? Or there's religious meaning to the words she says. She said hit all the right notes. It's a question we have. But for sure, in halacha, this becomes a pretty much of a blueprint for a lot of the process of gior, of what's necessary to happen when someone comes from another nation and wants to join Am Yisrael. And that apparently is, the story of gior is apparently important for two things. It's important for Malchut Beit David, because the story is Malchut Beit David. And it's also important for something, apparently the Torah also, because we read it on Shavuos. There may be an inherent connection between Kabbalat Torah and Megilat Ruth and Giur. And there may be something deeper that we need to go into to see the connections between these two things. And I just want to point out that also where else we learn Giur, Chazal say that at Har Sinai, Am Yisrael went through a Giur, Be'etzem. Right, what do they have there? They have the blood that's sprinkled on them. They have to bring korbanot. They Kabbalat mitzvot. Am Yisrael did a mass conversion on Matan Torah. And there too we learn halachot of what a ger needs to do. Okay? That's also from that. So there's something there are these little connections that we sort of have to keep in our mind. We're not going to solve everything and put it all together now. But as we go into the book, we always have to stop for a minute and see the meta picture. Okay. Let's go back to Perek Aleph, okay? First of all, question in Limud Torah. What's the Milah Mancha in this chapter? What's the Shoresh that appears here 15 times? What is the main Shoresh of this chapter? Yeah, look. This is an interesting question to find. When we learn Tanakh, we very often want to see if there is a refrain. Not always is there a refrain, and not always is it so clear, but in this chapter, it's very clear. There is a very, very clear shoresh that repeats itself very many times. I hinted. That repeats itself many, many times. 15 times, according to my count.
One word?
One shoresh.
One source.
You guys can do it. This is just a challenge in textual reading.
The shuv?
Exactly. The shore is shuv. Shin, vav, bet. And we'll play around with yud, shin, bet also to play around. The shore is shuv, yashav, 15 times. Quickly, I'm going to go through it so you guys see. I'm going to whirlwind it through so you'll get the feeling of how many times it happens, okay? Pasuk Daled, Vayeshvu sham ke'eser shanim. Pasuk Vav, Vatashov miste Moav. Pasuk Zayin, Lashuv el Eretz Yehuda. Pasuk Chet, Shovna. Pasuk Yud, Nashuv Lamech. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vatomer Nomi Shovna. Pasuk Yud Bet, Shovna. Pasuk Tetvav, Vatomer Hine Shava. Shuvi. Pasuk Tetzayin, Lashuv Me'acharaich. Pasuk Kaf Aleph, Heshivani. Pasuk Kaf Bet, Vatashov. And again in Pasuk Bet, Ashava. Okay? The word Shov is a word that we find again and again and again. And the word Shuv means to return. That's what it means. Okay? The return. So what exactly is the story of Perek Aleph? The story of Perek Aleph is the return. Mm-hmm. The return from where? Chutzlaretz. But where else is it from return from? From Moab to Am Yisrael. Right? Ruth is Shava also. There are different levels of people who are coming back. They're coming back physically from Moab, but they're also coming back to Am Yisrael. So this idea of return is an idea we're going to see in Megilat Ruth is another thing that's happening here. And if I would say, what is the story of Megillah of Perek Aleph? You could sort of say, oh well, they went and they died and then she comes back. No, the story is the coming back. The death is the backdrop for the coming back. That is our story, the return of Naomi. If I had to give a chapter, what is it? What is chapter 1? Chapter 1 is the return of Naomi. That's the story. That's the storyline. The return of Naomi. Okay? Shava, her return. Now, of course, Shav comes from the word also tshuva. Tshuva. There's tshuva happening here in Perek Aleph also. Right? There's a chet that happens in the beginning. And there's tshuva from that chet. And what is the tshuva from that chet? It's the same
return.
thing. It's the return itself. Okay? Yalla.
Well, isn't the reason that they died because they're like from like the tribe of Judah, and then they like go to Chutz La'aretz, and
So-
then God like smites them down?
For sure. And that starts off with the beginning of Vayhi Bimei Shvot Shoftim. And before we can take any stands into here, it means we have to know Sefer Shoftim. What's the context of our story? Sefer Shoftim. Who learned Sefer Shoftim? Good. What's the story of Sefer Shoftim?
It's about the series of judges throughout Israel until Shmuel.
Okay, it bridges the gap from Yoshua to Shmuel.
Right.
Okay, good. What else is the story of Shoftim? Shoftim is not one of our better books. So let's put it that way. It's not one of our better books. What is Shoftim?
Well, people were basically, they asked for a I mean, they sinned, asked for a shofet, were doing good, again started sinning, lost the shofet, and then asked for the shofet again.
So right. What Shmuel is referencing is the known cycle of Sefer Shoftim. Sin, punished, shofet, good. Sin, punished, shofet, good. Right? It's a circle. It goes around and around. That's what happens the whole book. Correct. That also happens in Sefer Shoftim. But I'm asking a harsher question. Sefer Shoftim is the story of the Balagan before Malchut. Okay? It's the Balagan that happens before, as the end of Sefer Shoftim says, Lifnei Meloch Melech Vayamim Ahem and Melech B'Yisrael. In those days there is no king of Israel. Okay?
Correct right now.
Not viewed.
We're like in the modern Shoftim.
Very much so. Very much so. In my opinion. That's how it helps me also understand what's happening now in Medinat Yisrael. Be'emet, there's a Balagan period. Okay? There, in other words, you come into the land, you're united, there's a power, there's a feeling, there's a mission. Yoshua has all of Am Yisrael together. He is the undisputed leader. And then what happens? What is the great tragedy that happens when they come into Eretz Yisrael?
They get lazy.
So they don't kill all the candidates.
They splinter. That is the real tragedy. That's the real problem with Sefer Shoftim. It's the underlying problem with Sefer Shoftim. They splinter. I go live in the Galil. You go live in the Hebron. You go live there. Am Yisrael only knew itself through an intense connection in the desert. They were mamash b'yachad, right? Your tent was mul my tent. We were all lived around the Shechina, around the Beit HaMikdash. Suddenly they come into the land. They fight for 14 years. B'yachad. How does Sefer Shoftim start? Anyone remembers the beginning of Sefer Shoftim? So Shevet Yehuda says to Shevet Shimon, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, right? You help me, I'll help you. This is already personal interests of a thing. When Yoshua captures the land, you never hear, oh, it's just one. Where does it happen? Actually, in Yoshua, you do hear it at one point. When Shevet Ephraim comes to Yoshua and says, oh, what is this? You gave me lands with lots of forests. And then Yoshua says, you're a lot of people, yalla, deal with it. You said there? But at first, the motion, everything that's going on in Yoshua is together. They're together. But then everyone starts getting their land. And they start living their own personal life. And where do we see that? Well, we see it in a bunch of cases. But one of the strongest cases is after the battle Devorah has. When Devorah, in the Song of Devorah, one of her critiques there is the critique of the other Shvatim who don't come to help. She says, where were you guys? We're fighting a battle. Reuven, Gad, the citizens of Meroz, where are you? Where are you? We're fighting a battle here. In every one of the things, the shofet is from a certain tribe. Pretty much his tribe follows them. But what about everyone else? Who says they join? They don't join the battles. Oh, I live in Yehuda. Beseder. They're shooting Katyushas at Kiryat Shmona. Beseder. Sderot. Beseder. I live in Tel Aviv. Beseder. Ma ze kashur elai. Everyone settles in their own land. And that's when Chazal say that no one was coming to Shiloh. No one's coming to Shiloh anymore. That idea, we don't know that no one's coming to Shiloh. We know that Elkanah comes to Shiloh in the beginning of Shmuel. That seems to be like something's going on. But the Chazal say Shiloh, it was abandoned. Shiloh was not known. Right? They say like in the end of Pelegesh Begiva, it says how to get to Shiloh. It gives mamash like Perut. You go to Shiloh, you go from here, you go from there. What do you mean? Why do you have to tell? Do I have to tell someone how to get to Yerushalayim now? Oh yeah, you have to go like this and from. What do you mean? You go down. Everyone knows how to get to Yerushalayim. Why do I have to start explaining how to get to Shiloh? Because no one knows how to get to Shiloh. Because they stopped going anywhere. Because they weren't going. They weren't centralized. They didn't feel together. They lost their achdut. That's the big problem. That's the sin, the basic sin of Shoftim. Now it's true they did Avodah Zarah, they didn't kill all the nations. There are all kinds of things going on, but what really killed us there was the separation that happens that culminates in Pilegesh Bagiva, the end of Shoftim, which is the horror story of the Tanakh almost of almost annihilating a whole tribe. Where we get to this close from annihilating a whole tribe of Israel. So there Binyamin, Benis, we say we get out of it. All right? The end story of Shoftim, necessary reading, okay? To understand what's going on. But that's sort of like summarize. That's like the epitome of the end of what's happening. It's the complete destruction of Achdut. Then, Atlat, Shmuel Elkanah, Shmuel's father, and Shmuel after him, they heal this problem. And they gather everyone together again. They join people together, and that leads its way to Malchut, which, be'esem, the difference between a melech and a shofet is exactly that. A melech is in charge of everyone, while a shofet was a particular person who was helping out in a specific situation. Why am I saying all this? Why is this important for us? Because it gives us the basis of the storyline that's happening here. The storyline of Megilat Ruth, as Gedaliah was pointing out in the beginning, is this is the atmosphere. But what do you do when it's hard for you? What do you do when there's hardship?
Persist.
Do you hold hands and say we're going to get through this together? Or does each person say, I'm out of here, I'm taking care of myself. Forget it. I don't care about you. I don't care about you. I'm going to save myself. What do you do in hardship?
You
Stick
unite.
together.
Well,
Try.
not if you're Elimelech, apparently. Okay? And here we have Elimelech. Vayhi b'meshvot hashoftim. Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz. All right, it's getting hard, people. It's time of the shoftim, and there's a ra'av. Well, what do you do when there's a ra'av? Vayelech ish mi bet lechem Yehuda lagur b'stem Moav hu v'ishto v'chulei. Says Rashi, Vayelech ish, Ashir gadol haya. Ashir gadol means he was a rich guy. Uparnas hador. He was the leader. He was the one who gave sustenance to the generation. Veyatza me'eretz Yisrael lechutz ha'aretz. Bipnei tzarut ha'ayin shaita einot tzara ba'aniyim haba'im ledochko. Tzarut ha'ayin means he had a
Narrow vision.
narrow eyes. He was unhappy with the aniyim who kept on knocking on his door, saying, help me, help me. I don't have any food to give my wife, to give my children. They're dying of hunger. He said, die, enough. And he got up and left. Rashi finishes, L'chach ne'anash, and therefore he was punished. All right, so this story, he is the epitome of Sefer Shoftim. Sefer Shoftim means I do not care about you. I care about myself. And I'm going to leave. And I don't, the klal doesn't interest me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Only the prat interests me. Okay? Only myself. It's the antithesis of chesed. It's the antithesis of chesed. Which says chesed inherently means doing something for another that is demands of me. Elimelech is the opposite. He leaves. And he says, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Okay? This is the beginning of our story. And they go, not surprisingly, to Moab. Now, what do we know about Moab? Okay, so we started off now Shvot HaShoftim. Why it was so important to give the basic understanding of when this is happening. Okay, so this guy is leaving from Beit Lechem Yehuda. Okay, so he's from Yehuda, and he goes to live in Sde Moav. You could choose anywhere, right? You could choose anywhere to go, but he chooses Sde Moav. Well, what do we know about Moav?
The jerks, they wouldn't let us pass through.
So,
Food.
right, what's the problem?
We got food.
So what's the problem with Moab? Well, first of all, let's just take we have an uneasy relationship with Moab and always have. Okay, Moab comes from Lot. We have an uneasy relationship with Lot, Rabotai. Okay, what do we know about Lot? So let's go back even further. Avram and Lot. Let's start from there. All right, Avram, when he leaves Haran to come to Eretz Yisrael, Lot comes with him. Nachon? What was Lot supposed to, what was Lot doing there? It's a very interesting question.
What was it in Sodom?
Well, no, when he leaves Haran, what was he an acolyte? Was he like a student? What in the world, chaperone? What in the world was Lot doing there? He goes with Abram. So
He was an orphan, right?
according to the Midrash, right, we know that his father, not Midrash, that Haran died. How he died, that's the whole story. But Haran died, and Lot's an orphan. That's it. So possibly Avram raised him. Adopted him, raised him. So he joins Avram in his journeys. At first, it's a pretty positive thing, right? He has a family member who's going with him. Not only that, does Avram have children?
No.
So who's going to continue Avram?
Supposedly not.
Barur. It's not supposedly. I'm pretty sure Lot thought that, and I'll prove it to you that Lot thought that way. How do we know that? According to the Midrash, of course. When Avram and Lot come back after going down to Egypt, Bira'av, there was a Ra'av, and Avram goes down to Egypt. Another hint here of something interesting, right? There's a Ra'av in Eretz Yisrael, and Avram goes to Egypt, and he gets very rich in Egypt because the Paro gives him lots of gifts, and they come back, and then it says there was a fight between the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Avram. What was the fight about? So Chazal tell us what the fight was. It doesn't say what the fight was about in the Tanakh. So the Chazal tells us what the fight was about. The fight goes like this.
Shepherd of Lot is
What?
the shepherd of Lot is trying to steal pasture there.
They would have their goats eaten all the fields around there.
Yeah.
And Avram's shepherds come and they say, "What are you guys doing?" He says, "What are you talking about? All these lands are for Avram, and who's going to inherit after Avram? Inherit all this long there. Avram was promised all these fields, and who's going to be the inheritor of Avram? Lot. That's our guy. Lot's our guy. In other words, these are all our fields already now." And Avram said, the Royer Avram said, no, the continuation of the pasuk is V'knani az ba'aretz. It's not time yet. It's true that we will, at some point, I will inherit these fields, but not now. It's not the time. So Lot saw himself as the inheritor. Even his shepherds saw himself as the inheritor. Okay? But at that point, Avram says, that's it, we can't do this. We have to separate. There's something wrong with Lot. Lot doesn't have Avram's eyes. What are Avram's eyes?
Ayin Tov.
Ayin Tova, right? As opposed to
Rasha.
Bilam Harasha, right? Who has an Einot Tzara. Ayin Tzara. Reminds us of Elimelech here of an Ayin Tzara, right? Someone who is looking for money. Who's looking for number one. Looking out for number one. That's what Lot really cares. Avram suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, maybe he knew this for a while, but he suddenly sees Lot. Lot doesn't have the same language that Avram has. Avram's language is Chesed. Avram and Chesed is basic. It's a basic connection. Avram and Chesed. Lot doesn't have that, and he says to Lot, "We're going to have to separate. I'm sorry. You're going to have to go either right or left." I always love this Perush, learned from the Tanakh, right? When he says you could go right or left, he meant you could go north or south, right? Remember, because everyone in the Tanakh, you're always standing facing east. And that's why it's called Kedma, in front of you. So he's looking Kedma. So if I'm looking Kedma, then Teiman, that we just get presents from them every so often nowadays, from Teiman, right, from Yemen. Teiman means
So
Yamin, to the right, because I'm standing facing the east. So to the right is Teimana, it's Yamin. and the left is Safona, right? So he tells him, if you go right, I'll go left. If you go left, I'll go right. And what does Lot say? Where does he want to go? He doesn't want to go neither left nor right. He wants to go east. To where? To Sdom. What do we know about Sdom? Rabbi say. So we do talk about that next time. We have to finish now. Bezrat Hashem. We're stopped right in the middle of Lot. Okay, Eric said, so we're going through here a little bit of understanding of the storyline that's happening here. Okay, because we're in Moab, and right now we're trying to understand what the significance of going to Moab is, and that there's much more significance than just being a neighboring land. Moab has a lot of meaning to it. We stopped with Lot on his way to Sodom, and we're going to have to take a look into that, what that means, and the ramifications, because Be'emet, Moab is born out of the destruction of Sodom. As we know what happens. Bezrat Hashem. Shkoyach, everybody.